Systems. So whether you're talking about systems in the martial arts or, you know, the broader world, they all kind of work the same way. They're massively important, first and foremost, because language itself is systemic, and I wouldn't want to be trying to get by without that, you know, not for a second. But a system is only ever the map. It's not the actual terrain. Language itself, you know, the actual words we use, as most people know, only make up a tiny amount of what we are actually conveying, the reality that we are actually attempting to convey with those words. A lot of it's body language, a lot of it's intonation, etc., etc., etc. So the experience and the actual intended meaning or intent of, you know, a given passage of language is extremely different, you know, compared to just examining it on the page. And if anybody's ever been in court in any way, shape or form and seen the solicitors go to work, then there's a really, really clear example right there of how these people can jump on the actual mechanics, the actual words involved in a statement, and suddenly, you know, bring in a lot of doubt and cloud the waters by focusing on the minutiae and focusing on all of the possible intonations that may possibly have been attached to this particular choice of word is nonsense, okay? When really most people have that gut feeling. They look at the statement, they look at the situation in front of them, and they understand exactly what's happened, exactly what was being conveyed, but, you know, because of the rigid tick box robot culture that we've got, an awful lot of crap still ends up passing. So that's one example of following systems pedantically to the letter of the law, and in this case though very deliberately ignoring the reality of the scenario. But this time that's more twisting language to work for your advantage. But I mean, give you an example. If you've got a map of the terrain and you're moving along and you're following your map to the letter and it's all spot on, and then suddenly we find that a 200-foot sinkhole has opened up in front of us. Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to walk forward blindly into the sinkhole because the map tells you to do it? Or are you then going to apply yourself in the moment? You know, take what you know from your map, you know, and use a little bit of creativity and individuality and work out an alternative route around. And that really, that's the relationship between the individual and the system. At the end of the day, a good system, yeah, never claims to be anything but the map for a start. And a good system is also built on experiential knowledge, someone that's actually walked the terrain, right? And then they've identified certain common patterns or scenarios or reference points, you know, that occur commonly. And they take those and they isolate them and they make those the sort of the bedrock, the basics of that given system. Okay, let's say we're talking about martial art, for instance, okay? So, whereas you can play the odds effectively with a good system, and whereas your attention will be drawn to focusing on the right kind of techniques, for instance, that's great. But at the end of the day, there is not a system, you know, in existence that can possibly hope to account for every possible variation, every possible intangible, every possible outcome of every possible system. It's nonsense. You can't put life in a box. Simple, yeah? That's why I personally, you know, I disagree with religion, because, you know, for the very same reasons, you know, if you can't even put, say, the art of combat into a box effectively, yeah, then how do you put everything, life, the universe and everything into a box? You know what I mean? It's, no. Now, it's always the individual interpretation of the system that matters, not the system itself, okay? Even a flawed system can work really well if the individual applying it is doing so with intelligence, with consciousness in the living moment, as opposed to just, following blindly like a robot and walking down that sinkhole. It's, I would never stereotype. I mean, for instance, my own background is in traditional martial art, and I know I'm very functional in a live situation because I've been there on numerous occasions, and I've applied a lot of those techniques that I learned from that traditional format. Now of course I know that traditional martial art, with all the ceremony and the history and everything involved, is not the most direct or effective way to teach somebody how to fight physically, all right? I could distill that right down. That's broadening out more into the artistic aspect of the system, which is important because that provides you balance. Again, the samurai had the idea of balance, so they'd be practicing their martial art and killing on the battlefield, and then they'd be practicing their flower arranging or their tea ceremonies. And the idea was that it was to put yourself into that pursuit as much as, every bit as deeply as you do the killing and the warlike stuff. But obviously it was with a completely different intent behind it, creative instead of destructive. So, all things considered, yeah, it's always, the individual that I care about. I don't care what system they've come from. I certainly wouldn't judge somebody because they trained in a certain style of martial art that isn't in fashion or in vogue, or that does in actual fact have a lot of cowboys and lunatics attached to it. I certainly wouldn't judge somebody on their, religion or faith or anything else like that. I'm always going to judge people on their personal interpretation of it. It's down to the individual. The individual makes the art, makes the system, not the other way around. Very easy to get addicted to systems, and that's a massive pitfall.